Hello, beautiful souls. I'm Jenny Aiello, and this is With Love, Jenny, a podcast where we meet ourselves right in the heart of our vulnerability and authenticity. In this sacred space where it's just you and I dive into real life, rich with wisdom and opportunities for deep healing. I explore what it means to truly connect to ourselves, to each other, and to something much greater than us all. In each podcast, I like to meet life right where it touches us most, in our tenderness, in our truth, in our struggles and our strength. So wherever you are on your journey, or whatever it is that you're carrying, no matter how light or heavy, just know I'm so grateful that you're here with me today. So take a deep breath, settle in, and let's begin today's episode. Hey there, it's Jenny. I'm here today with my co-host, Kristen, and we are so excited for our first official episode. Woohoo! So let's dive in. Kristen, are you ready?
Yes, it feels so good and so right to be here today.
Yeah, I'm excited. Well, our episodes will almost always start with a story. And I'm going to share a story that goes back to when I was just 3 years old. It's probably the oldest story I can think of other than the story of the day I was born, but we'll do that another episode. But this story is about a decision that I made at 3 years old around not disappointing someone that I love. And it's what I believe to be the birthplace of my tendency toward codependency. So here's the story. I was the daughter of my mom and dad, obviously, and I had 3 older brothers, and they were much older than me, 7, 8, 9 years older than me. So I was the only girl, and I was the baby girl of our family. Now, my dad was very much a man's man. He was an athlete. He was a sports fanatic. He was a coach, and he was a competitor. And he didn't know what to do with a girl. He was like enamored with having a daughter, but he was like, what do you do with these? And he knew that I didn't come into this world to be a porcelain doll that was protected, but he just didn't know what to do with me. So one day my mom said, hey, Ben, there is a father-daughter banquet at the Armory, and I think you should take Jenny. So my dad said, great, let's do, sign up. Now, most of us don't have a whole lot of memories at the age of 3. And I don't know if I actually have the memory of this experience or the memory of the story as it was told. But I do have what we do get at age 3, which is the visceral emotional experience. And that's what I'm going to be sharing with you. So being the only girl, my mom had a ball dressing me up like a doll. She dressed me in this pink dress with lots of petticoats. I had these white little anklet socks that had lace around them, and then little patent leather white Mary Jane shoes. So I'm all dressed in my fancy, and off we go to the father-daughter banquet. And I don't know, we ate dinner, which to a 3-year-old is probably not the most exciting thing. But then after dinner, there were all these activities, one of which was for the 3-year-olds, a race. So my dad lit up. Now we have a competition. He's going to coach me. I'm going to win the race, right? So he starts to get me ready. And I don't know, if I'm into it or not, but we go over to this floor. On the floor, there is a long piece of masking tape on the floor. And 10 feet in front of that one is another long piece of masking tape, right? And across the starting line in front of each little girl was a peanut. It was the one that comes in a shell. So a full peanut was on the masking tape. And our job was to get on our hands and knees and roll the peanut with our nose to the finish line, 10 feet away. And I just wasn't into it, apparently. And I told my dad, I don't think I want to do this. And my dad was like, oh, no, you've got to do it. Come on, like you just flick it, flick it with your nose. You'll get it to go further. Don't put your knees down because you might, that'll slow you down. Like do this crawl. And he's given me all these tips that a coach would give his beautiful athletic daughter about how to roll a peanut with my nose. So we get on the starting line. Again, I expressed I didn't want to do it. My dad again insisted and put me down on front of this peanut. And I'm down on the floor looking at this peanut in front of my nose, perched in the way that was going to be the way to win the race. And the man said, on your mark, get set, go. And he blew his whistle. And I stood up and I turned around and said, I don't want to do this. My dad, who was well over 6 foot tall, and I at that time am maybe 2 feet tall, looked towering to me. I remember the visceral feeling. I don't have the memory except through story, but I looked up, and in that moment, my dad threw his arms way up to the sky, threw his head back and went, oh, I can't believe it. You're not going to do the race. And he just looked at me. And in that moment, I felt what it felt like to disappoint someone. And this wasn't just someone. This was my first love. This was the first man I loved. And this was my dad. And I didn't like that feeling of disappointing him. So he did not shame me that day, but I picked up a cloak of shame and made up that there was something wrong, that I did something bad. And in disappointing him, that was what I carried forward in my subconscious mind. Again, remembering stories before we're 5 years old is not a cognitive memory. It's a visceral, emotional, nervous system memory. It's about what that experience felt like. It's not what words were spoken. But this story was told my whole childhood. For the next 15 years, this story came up more times than I can count about the day that Jenny wouldn't roll the peanut with her nose. And every time it happened, we would laugh, but I felt the feeling. So I want to fast forward 15 years because the rest of this story is really, really important to what we're going to talk about with people pleasing and codependency. It was 15 years later. It was my high school graduation, and my whole family and my boyfriend at the time, we'll be talking about him later, we all were gathered around, and my parents gave me a box wrapped in this beautiful wrapping paper, tied in a ribbon. But before I opened it, I had to read a letter that my dad wrote to me. And in this letter, it began, my beautiful daughter, I'm writing this to you tonight. You just left for your senior prom, and you never looked more beautiful. Those were the first lines of this letter. And then he proceeded to tell me that for years he had been thinking about what he would give to me when I graduated, which meant that I was heading out into the big world, right? And in this letter, he said he wanted to give me a gift that was an heirloom, so he chose to make it. He wanted to give me a gift that would represent holding value because he knew that I would always hold true to my values. He wanted it to represent something funny because humor played such a huge role in how we did life. And he wanted me to always remember how to laugh and just to be funny. He wanted it to represent something that would reflect my dream of growing up and having a very large family. I always wanted 6 or 7 children since I was 6 years old. And so he knew that. And he said, I want it to represent your dream of a large family. And so it ended up that it was my dad. Let me stop and tell you, my dad was a dentist. And so he did a lot of gold inlays and fillings and used gold. And it was the old days of dentistry. He did a lot of his own lab work. So there was a lot of gold shavings and excess gold that was used when he was doing dental work. And he had collected it in a jar over the years. And he used his equipment and made a golden peanut for me and put it on a chain. And that's what was in the box. But the letter that he wrote had these affirming words. It said, this peanut, now that you know what the present was, the peanut represented being a funny nut. It represented gold, which always holds value. It represented peanuts grow a lot. One peanut planted has a lot of peanuts growing underneath the soil. So it took care of that part. And so all the points that he made were held inside this golden peanut, right? But at the end of the letter, he said, when you were just 3 years old, you stood up for what you believed in. You spoke your truth. You said what you wanted and didn't want in life. And I was never more proud of you than that day that you stood true to who you are. And for that, I love you. He closed the letter saying, when you are in your darkest hour, hold this peanut, polish it, watch it shine, because Jenny, it's really you. So this was an invaluable gift to me. And the first thing I said is, you let me feel bad about that for 15 years because I carried so much shame for disappointing him. And that day, my perspective changed. And he had no idea that I was carrying shame. He thought that it was a reminder of how wonderful it was that I stood up for myself, even to someone like my dad that I adored. And so today, I want us to talk about the power of affirming words, the power of a change in perspective, also the discovery and power of those subconscious beliefs and how they play out in life, and then how codependency can take hold and carry with it a strong hold of how we do relationships throughout our life. So that's today's story. And Kristen, I'm sure you have some questions and thoughts.
Yeah. That was a really great story for what you're going to be talking about. For those people that are just starting on the journey, can you tell them, did you always know that you could pinpoint your codependency back to 3 years old, and talk a little bit about a lot of the things that form in those early couple years that we're not aware of that make us who we are today?
Yeah, no, at 18 on that graduation day, changed my perspective of that story. And I thought that was the end of it. I thought, oh, I'm off the hook. But not until decades and decades later, actually not until maybe the last 10 years, which you all don't know how old I am. I'm not going to tell you. But it was a long time later before I recognized that it's not enough to get that awareness and change in perspective. We have to do the work in our subconscious mind to bring it into conscious awareness if we're going to heal it. Mm-hmm. And I didn't know until the last decade of doing the work that was the culprit to a lot of dysfunction in my relationships, is the belief that I couldn't speak my truth and take care of my needs. It was important for me to make sure I didn't disappoint anyone.
Yeah, I can totally relate. I just keep thinking about my anchor story, and I've been doing the work, well, probably my whole life. You not really realize you're doing the work. But 2 weekends ago, I'm like, oh my gosh, I have been holding on to this story since I was 5 and living it out. And it was just very eye-opening. And then once you get to that point, okay, now you can do the work around that. But it's just really interesting to hear you talk about it. And, I guess I don't want people to go in thinking that they're going to know right away why they are the way they are. And not everybody will get what you got from your dad. Like, what amazing closure. Like, what amazing healing. So I thought that was really good.
Well, and that's some of the things that I want to challenge our listeners, to think about. If you're raising children, even if they're adults, those affirming words carry us. They carried us. And in our next episode, I'm going to talk about an example of how that message, when it first impacted me, it impacted me the day I got that gift, but I didn't have dark days. I didn't know pain yet. I mean, I had some experience with it, but it wasn't until later that I was lost and how that gift. So that's coming up on the next episode, just to give you a hint. But we don't have those memories to know it's our early childhood development, those first 5 years to 7 years of our life, especially the first 5, because our cognitive brain is still forming and getting its functionality. And we're living more in a visceral, in the moment, how do I feel experience. And so we don't have the memory of what happened. We have the feeling of what happened. And as we trek through life, things that happen to us that spark a memory of the feeling, it's hard to know what it is if you don't have a cognitive definition of it. And I was able to connect the dots. And a lot of those early childhood stories aren't ones that we know, they're ones that are told. And you might have had a parent that retold stories of you before you were 5 years old. If you still have your parent, ask them, tell me what's some of the stories of before I started, kindergarten. What was I like? What did I do? And you'll get some information on 2 levels. One, you'll get a picture of who you were authentically at that age, because that holds our most authentic self, right? But then we start getting told to not talk so much. And then we start getting told, we're too much, or start getting told to sit down or to be quiet or don't do that, or you're always this and never say that again. And then pretty soon, we're not that authentic. We're more appropriate maybe, but we're not as authentic. And if you listen to who's telling the story, who knew you before you were 5, you'll start to get glimpses of that authentic version of yourself, but you'll also see how the story gets told. Is it told in something was wrong with you, or you were bad, or you were too much, or is it told in all the good ways of affirming? If it's told in not so good ways, it's your job to actually take the story and rewrite it to the affirming ways. Like, it's most important that your voice says the affirmation, that you claim that you claim, I was strong enough to say no. I was, confident enough to stand up for myself and not do something I didn't want to do. Like, all of that went away at the age of 3 for me because of that experience. And I had to reclaim it. I had to reclaim a voice inside that I had at 3 to say, I have to do this, and you might not like it, but it's something important to me. And I have to have the self-esteem, the self-confidence, the belief in myself to be able to hold that boundary. And I spent most of my life not holding that boundary.
I was thinking, how wild is it that one incident set your life on a trajectory that you may not have ever gone on. And once you start doing the work, you're able to look back and see the gifts in it and think, oh, I'm glad that happened that way, because I wouldn't find the gold in who I am now if I didn't go through those experiences. It's not like you can have this leave it to Beaver, rose-colored glasses life, because it's just like they say, you need light for darkness, you need darkness for light. Like, it's horrible as stories can be and where that they take you in life. It's made you who you are now, and a seeker and someone that wants to live from love. So it's just wild to me. Yeah.
It is so true. And there's many of those. That one, because the story was told and it had such a profound rest of the story. But in the last decade, looking back beyond the story, go past the story, go deeper than the story, and claim the wisdom. Because some people might think, well, what a horrible experience, and look at all the damage. And it did. It wrecked a lot of relationships, and it almost actually cost me my own mental and emotional health over a decade ago in different ways that I had to approach situations in my life. And that's why I want to share. I wanted to start with this story because I will be referencing this throughout all our episodes that tell a story of things that were the dark nights of my soul, because it was that codependent, people-pleasing part of me that led to destruction. And in the moment, it would feel good, but in the long run, it didn't work. And I finally was able to recognize my role in that. And until you can go back and see what lit the match to that, and then suspend your judgment. I am so grateful for that experience. I'm so grateful for the way that I was able to pinpoint the beginning of that codependency for myself. But what really matters is, even if you don't know where that started, but you just know you are a people pleaser and you are bordering on codependency or full-blown codependency, it probably began like my story. But my story began with love. My story was not something malicious that happened to me or something tragic that happened to me. It was a loving exchange. And I believe that it happens for a reason. I believe everything sets us up to win with love, but it takes us through, our growth of it takes us through some hardship. And a lot of times we might get stuck in the hardship and become victim of all our stories. And excuse my French, but I'm hell bent on getting out of the mud of victimhood, no matter what. I don't want to live from that. And I often find myself in the phase of our healing, we are going to get in the victim mud because we all have been victimized in some way at some point in our life where things out of control happened that caused us to suffer in innocent ways. We still feel it. And it's an important part of our journey. It's not one to skip over or try to avoid. It's sitting there saying, okay, from that, this is where the lotus is planted, right? And we have to push through that muddy muck and go to the light. And it develops our courage, it develops clarity, it develops strength, it brings wisdom. And if you stay in that work and you get yourself up and out, you get to bathe in the sunlight as this beautiful lotus flower. And it might take decades, and that's okay. That's okay. The other thing about our stories, and as you start to really think deeper than what we're talking about, when you start to reflect, what might my story have been? Look at how you take your current events. Your current events, whatever story is going on in your life right now, it's an extension. It is rooted in something that happened, a belief that you developed before you were 5 years old. And you don't have to know all the details of it. You just need to know that this is a pattern in my life that's happening because of a belief I adopted before I was 5 years old. And how do I take this repetitive pattern in my story and learn and grow and heal? And once it's healed, once the wound is healed and the story is converted to one of empowerment, where you go, oh, wow, okay, yes, I do have a voice. I do know my truth. I have the right to stand in my power, speak my truth with love, not with harm or in ill intent. At any time it's met with harm and ill intent, it's unhealed, because I believe that when we have healed, our stories are all there to be offered with love. And if someone is triggered by it, that's their healing, right? That's for them. But you don't want to project pain on others. And that's frankly the nature of our world, is that we're all running around projecting our pain and unhealed wounds, inserting them in situations and projecting them onto others. And that's why we're in the mess we're in. But learning to glean and go beneath the story, reach beyond the story, and grab that wisdom that it offers and the lesson it was teaching us. You have gratitude then for all of the subsequent ways it played out.
I also want to comment too that as you're discovering this and you get ahas, that you absolutely need to give yourself grace, because it's not like once you uncover something, it's gone. Jenny always tells me life is not linear, it's a spiral. So you keep going around and around, and the bump might come again, but they're farther apart. And, I've had talks with Jenny where I'm like, I cannot believe I'm here again. I cannot believe how I'm reacting to this situation. And she'll tell me, Kristen, it's coming back around again because you are ready to deal with it at a deeper level. So
yes,
I just wanted to note that.
That's really important. And I think that's why it took me decades. I went around that story around and around, and I would get a little more and a little more and a little more. And then boom, I was like, for me, that one was eye-opening, like, oh my gosh, and you're so right, Kristen. If I don't have grace, I could easily then beat myself up for taking too long to get the wisdom. But it wasn't designed for me to know that at 18. It wasn't designed for me. I had to experience life to experience the healing of that. And it took a lifetime of experiencing it before I finally got to the place that I could say, wow. And do I want to say why did I even go there? Why did I decide that I would take the disappointment instead of the empowerment of that? And I believe it's why we're here. I don't think we came down here on vacation. Our soul came here to grow and expand. Right. And people can't, growth. I always tell this story. I read it somewhere that growth is a destructive process. It's not the beautiful flower, or the big oak tree. The oak tree began inside an acorn, and a life force had to explode. The shell and the casing of that energy had to destruct. It had to disintegrate. It had the outside layers of that acorn have to rot in the earth for the mighty oak to become who it wants to be.
Yeah, I recently saw a meme on Instagram that said, allow yourself to heal at the pace of nature. Yes. We're in this Western world where we want immediate, give me that pill, give me something that I'll be okay in the next hour.
Right.
And that's not how it works. You would miss so many gifts if it happened in a second. Like, you have to allow yourself to be underground. You have to allow yourself to push through the dirt. You have to allow yourself to be in the sun. And this feels not normal because you're used to chaos. You're so used to chaos that you create chaos because it feels comfortable. So you have to allow that, the slowness. There's so much medicine in the slowness is one thing Jenny has taught me.
Oh man, that is slowness and stillness. Mm-hmm. Are two of my best friends, and I go 90 miles an hour all the time. So I have to remind myself, I have to tell myself it's okay to slow down. It's okay to breathe, to take a minute. I think we're going to have there's so many tangents that this topic takes me through. And that's why it's our first one. So I'll not go down a rabbit hole right now, but I just think as we kind of wrap up, I want everyone to think about what are the patterns of your pain? What are the patterns of your pain for purposes of healing? You can also look at what are the patterns of your joy? Where is it rooted? What are the beliefs that allow you to experience bliss? When I ask my clients that when I'm coaching, a lot of times it's quick to identify the patterns of pain, and it's really hard to identify the patterns of joy, which tells me that we live more from those wounds. And the reason we're living more from our pain or the woundedness is because it's screaming to be healed. That's our body. Our stories are telling us, hey, I'm coming back around. I want you to notice this isn't healed yet. Is it time? And then we quickly pass it by and say, no, not now. I'm too busy. But it'll keep coming around. And the voices get louder and bigger through our stories. And pretty soon you go, oh gosh, it's time to deal with this. It's time. And then you begin the healing journey for that. But it isn't a microwave zapper journey. And you don't want it to be, because in the healing itself is revealed all the gifts, all the gold lies in the journey, not in the freedom of pain, but in the journey of healing. It is such a rich, beautiful world inside of us that we get to step foot on and start a path of healing inward. Instead of trying to run around fixing all the people outside of us, you begin to recognize what made you you, what parts of you are authentic, what parts of you were formed as a form of protection. Our ego is not trying to hurt us. It's always trying to protect us. And so my ego said, oh, you don't want to ever feel that feeling of disappointing someone you love. So we are going to please the heck out of everybody you meet. We are going to be such a good girl. We are going to be happy all the time. We are going to hide our feelings if we're not happy. We're going to suffer in silence and not share our vulnerabilities. That was what my ego said, promised me it would do for me as we journeyed out into life. And it upheld that. But it's up to the wise part of me. It's up to my spirit to say, thank you, ego, for all that protection. For all these years, I've got this because I want to feel all of it. I want to live fully. I want to live without apology. I want to live out from behind that curtain of shame. I want to live out from behind that fear of disappointing another. And that's where our growth is and our healing happens, when we get that conviction to do this work. And then the work begins. And there's a quote that I read from Xavier Dagba, and it says, you can tolerate going through disappointment without letting it hijack your self-esteem. And that actually is why it's not easy, is that I have to be able to tolerate disappointment too, right? It's not just about not disappointing others. My perfectionism is born in this too, which we're going to talk about, in the way that if everything's perfect, then I won't disappoint myself. I will control everything in order not to feel disappointment. And I don't like when other people disappoint me. And I can easily put shame on them because I don't like the feeling of being disappointed or disappointing someone else. So how could you disappoint me? How dare you disappoint me? What's wrong with you? I don't say those words, and probably my children would say I said them all the time. I don't consciously say them, but my energy sure will say, what? You mean you're not going to do what pleases me? So when we are people pleasers, we expect to be pleased, and then we're disappointed when we're not. So this is like another huge rabbit hole, right? These are things to think about. What is your relationship to disappointment?
I like that you use the word relationship because it goes both ways, of the inner relationship and the outer relationship. And a lot of people who just start the path, and I'm saying this from experience, that everything is coming from the outside affecting you. But once you start looking inside, you're like, oh, some of that's me. And that's really hard to swallow.
It's one of the hardest things to admit, but it's really hilarious when you start to get these ahas sometimes, like, oh, wait, you mean that was me? Oh my gosh. But when we're laughing, but to say that, oh, you mean it's me? I couldn't do that without a good self-concept, without an affirming message that I'm okay to be imperfect. You have to have a good self-esteem, or that growth gets hijacked.
Yeah, I guess my question is, when did you realize that part of it was oh, I'm trying to people please myself. Like, were you always thinking that it was for others, or did you at one point realize, oh, I'm doing this to me too? If I let myself down, I feel horrible.
Again, it's a circular lesson for me, but I will say that my children were my greatest teachers of all of it. I think that when my children began to leave the nest, so they were stepping out into the world like I did with my peanut, having no idea how that thing was going to be a teacher to me the rest of my life. When my children are headed out in the world, as they started leaving the nest, all of this lesson started to manifest itself for my healing. And they began teaching me. And they were teaching me all along. It just got louder as they were adults. And I'm still learning. They're still teaching me about that. And I didn't connect the dots because they were the ones that would tell me the things that I needed to hear. And I'm like, oh my gosh, it's me. It is me. And I have to look at how another layer of people pleasing has impacted my entire life and my relationships.
Yeah.
Another layer of my relationship to disappointing, to the entire energy of disappointment has impacted my entire life. It's been influencing things right and left. I just didn't know. So, my work, it continues to amaze me when I'm doing my work, when I'm in this self-exploration and I'm looking at what is mine and what is not. And for me now, it's all mine. It's all here for me to learn something. It's okay for it to be all here for me to learn from. And when you think that every single thing that happens to us is by design for us to glean the wisdom, the love, the lesson, the blessing, it's all there for us. And I love to think of our life, as much as I strive for perfection as a human being, we will never be perfect. It's an impossibility to be perfect. But in divinity, everything is perfect.
Right.
So from a higher perspective of a divine plan that puts everything in motion, it is a perfect plan, and it is one that we will never understand. In the depths of our pain, it won't make sense. But I trust that one day, maybe it will. Because some things, it's impossible to understand the depth of pain that people have to experience. And to think that was divine and perfect, no, it's a little hard to swallow that much, right?
Yeah.
But I do believe it exists. I do believe that one day we'll understand. One day we'll have the answers to the mystery of why we have things happen the way they do. But there is a whole lot that we can get that understanding when we do the work. And there's probably 10% that we will never understand. But start doing the work. That's our challenge. That's our invitation. Don't be afraid to go inward and start exploring your why. Why do I do the things I do? Why do I believe the way I believe? Why do I react the way I react? Start that journey. You'll never quit because it's remarkable. You might pause, you might pull in for a pit stop because sometimes it does get pretty rocky and intense in that journey, but you will probably never quit because it's an endless universe to explore when we start into our own path.
And really what you're doing is you're forming an intimate relationship with yourself. I mean,
Yes.
What a gift. So keep going is what I tell myself internally, because the more I get to know myself, the more I feel comfortable in my own skin, the more I love myself. And it's addicting, really.
Right.
And you're able to be a light in the world for others. It's amazing the more that you show up as your authentic self, how other people feel comfortable to do the same.
Right. You give them permission.
Mm-hmm.
And, most of us, we've not had permission to be ourselves because our ego tried to protect us.
Right.
And we are way more familiar with our inauthenticity, and putting that in the world is way more comfortable, safe, familiar, all of it. But showing up authentically with our light is terrifying.
It feels raw.
It's scary. It does. It's like tear off my skin and put me out in the world, right? And it's scary and it's hard. And so it's a process. It is part of what takes the healing time. Time does heal, right? But we have to tend to the wounds.
Yeah.
And that's our message in our podcast and in life and in my coaching and with my clients. It's let's tend to your wounds.
Your inner garden.
Yes, it is. So we're going to head over to the blessing room, and there we're going to talk a little bit more about the relationship between the people pleasing and codependency. And we're going to talk about some tools that help you catch it and stop it and glean the lesson from it, and end with a little blessing. So if people pleasing and disappointing and codependency are up for you, you may want to join us over at Patreon in the blessing room for the further discussion. If not, have a good day. Internalize these words that we spoke today, and may they be a blessing to you and that you receive them with love. Take care. Thank you so much for being here with me today. I hope you found a spark of wisdom to carry with you, and maybe even a deeper invitation to heal and grow and transform through your own beautiful story. Or maybe this episode made you think of someone who could use encouragement. And if so, I hope you will share it with them. If you'd like to learn more about working with me or attending one of my healing retreats, coaching programs, and other offerings, you can visit my website at jennyaiello.com or email me directly at jenny@jaiello.com. You'll find all the links in the show notes. If today's episode touched you, it would mean the world if you would leave a review or share it with someone who might need it, or just reach out and let me know how it landed for you. I'd love to hear from you. I'm building something special here. Real stories, real life, real connection. One episode, one heart, and one story at a time. As always, with love. Oh, and this is the legal message, but mostly a message from my heart. And I just need to share this with you right now. Please know this podcast is offered solely for educational and entertainment purposes. If you find yourself triggered due to anything that was shared in this podcast, please seek professional help. This podcast is not intended to be a substitute for mental health services. While I am a professional life coach, I am not a psychotherapist, nor am I a mental health clinician. So if you are struggling emotionally, please seek help, because you matter, you are important, and most of all, you are worthy of doing this work, the work that leads you to a better and healthier place. Okay? All right. Thank you. And please always make enough time to take care of yourself, and do so with love.